Okay, everyone, I'd like to get your attention. If we can get started, it's 3:30. And I'd like to thank Dr. Mote, President of the National Academy of Engineering, for being here and taking the time to visit with us. It's truly an honor. I also like to announce to everyone that we are live broadcasting this event. You can ask questions. Those who are in the live broadcast virtual environment, you can ask questions by tweeting #UMCOE, or you can also chat through live stream at coe.miami.edu/speaker. We have two students, Camille and Blaze, who will be taking questions from the virtual audience. In addition to our normal virtual audience, we also have a conference room at the medical school that is also chiming in as well. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Gu, who will introduce Dr. Mote.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to introduce Dr. C.D. Mote. He is currently president of the National Academy of Engineering and a Regents Professor on leave from University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Mote held an endowed chair in mechanical systems at Berkeley and chaired the mechanical engineering department from 1987 to 1991. When the National Research Council ranked its graduate program effectiveness highest nationally. In 1998, Dr. Mote was recruited to the presidency of the University of Maryland, College Park, a position he held until 2010 when he was appointed a Regents Professor. The Academy ranking of World University ranked the campus number 36 in 2010 and its engineering school number 13. The National Academy of Engineering elected Dr. Mote to membership in 1988 and to the position of counselor 2002 to 2008, treasurer 2009 to 2013, and president for a 6-year term beginning July 1st, 2013. Dr. Mote's recognitions include the NIH Founders Award, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers Medal, and the Hamburg Prize of the Federal Republic of Germany. He is an honorary fellow of the American Society for Mechanical Engineers, the fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, American Academy of Mechanics, Acoustical Society of America, and American Association for Advancement of Science. He holds 4 honorary doctorates and 2 honorary professorships. Let's welcome Dr. Mote for inspiring lecture.
Thank
you. This one in the pocket or to put it?
Can I put it inside my pocket?
Yeah.
So I can look a little more civilized? Does that still work? Should work? Well, Professor Gu, thank you very much for that very warm introduction. And I thank you all, your audience and the audience out in cyberspace. I also thank you all for giving me this opportunity to say a few things about a topic of the direction to the future. And it's something I've been kind of working on, thinking about for a long time. And so I sort of jump at the chance when someone gives me an opportunity to talk about it. And I look forward to your questions if you think some of these ideas are crazy, because this is not a simple problem where there's an answer with a box at the bottom of the page, and so on. So this is actually, it's not predicting the future, by the way, because no one can really predict the future. But sometimes you can identify a probable direction to the future. And even knowing the direction can be quite valuable if you think you've got it. So I want to talk about this question, and this whole idea was stimulated by this quotation from Oliver Wendell Holmes. That's actually the father of the jurist. So he was a scholar and visionary in the early 19th century. And he said, the great thing in this world is not so much where we stand, is in what direction we're moving. And it sounds like a pretty simple statement. But actually, I have found this to be extremely important advice, and I've used it for decades myself. If you know what direction you're moving in, it's even more important than knowing where you stand. And then the question is, well, how might you use this thinking, this idea that could be valuable? So that's what we want to talk about today. And so what I want to do today is to try to see if you might agree that you actually can look at the direction you're moving and make some conclusions from it. And we'll use a little past history to do that. And then we will look at where we are today as a country and as a world, and see if you agree what direction we're moving in today, and then what predictions you might, or speculations you might make from knowing that direction. Okay, that idea. And the example we'll use at the end will be universities, because we all here, everybody's engaged with universities. You all understand what's good and bad about universities and all the headaches and the good news. Of course, the dean knows all about this, and the departments know about this, president knows about this. And so we can speculate about what this direction might mean for universities, if you agree, of course, that the direction makes sense. That's a big if. Okay, so as we go about this, I've decided to pick this idea about these directions to the future. So what determines it? Well, these are for countries, collected country strategies for health, prosperity, and security. Mostly security, by the way. It should be security, prosperity, and health. That helps determine the direction to the future, according to Holmes. The second would be the power balances between countries. Some big countries have more effect on the global direction than others, as you can imagine easily, I believe. And then, of course, the global circumstances affecting all countries, but are outside the individual control of a country. Climate change, for example, things like that, right? So there are always things that are happening. And the combination of all these things actually end up with a global direction for the future. So you need to look at these factors, and then you can see what you can conclude from it. So I'm picking three areas, 3 periods to look at. There is and I've picked one period to start with, which is long past, and therefore we can think about how that came about and how much, how accurate our prediction might be for the direction of the future by looking at this past history. In other words, we have history to show how it worked out. And that's the late 20th century, 1945 to 1990, Cold War period. Now, most of you weren't born then, of course, so you have to rely on the fact what we tell you is true about it. But some people are old enough in here that have some experience about that. The second period is what I call a transition decade between 1990 and 2000. So, and you'll understand a little bit later why I call that a transition decade. That is basically a transition that says we don't have a direction. That is, we were trying to find the direction in that period. And then the current direction would be a 21st century direction from about the year 2000 to today. That is the direction of this century, I would say. I speculate on that. So you have the Cold War direction, you have the transition period, then you have the new direction. Okay, that's the way I'm thinking about this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 21st century direction, the 20th century direction. Now I want you to think of it this way. 1945. Atomic bombs dropped in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. War ended. Germany surrendered. We're now entering the Cold War period. We, all of us sitting here, are working for the government in DC. And President Roosevelt says to us, the science advisor, give me a plan for where we're going for the future. How are we going to set the direction for the country in this period? Okay? Someone need to do that. The science advisor at that time was Vannevar Bush. Okay, so He essentially was given the charge by President Roosevelt to give the plan for the future. And we are the group that he has assembled to do this. And we're going to discuss how we're going to structure the country for the times following the war, when Soviet Union now is taking up, spreading its strength, military strength in Eastern Europe. The Cold War is taking shape. It's actually not peacetime by any means. Europe is destroyed. U.S. is on this side of the branch, so we have the East and West divide, all clearly identified. So what are the issues? So the first thing we would ask as our group is, what are the defining most critical issues? The first one I have, of course, is fear of nuclear annihilation. That was the paramount driver of national policy and anxiety in 1945, fear of nuclear annihilation. So why was that true? Well, of course, these atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. And within a matter of days, Japan surrendered. Now, surrender to a Japanese person was dishonorable. In fact, that's why Japanese were so difficult dealing with prisoners of war, because they considered prisoners of war dishonorable people, because they shouldn't have surrendered. They should have died in the combat of supporting their cause. Okay, so for Japan en masse to surrender, what kind of level of terror would be required in that population for that to be an acceptable outcome? Furthermore, not only did Japan surrender, it surrendered unconditionally. That is, it would be unimaginable for Japan to happen. And everybody, all of us now sitting here, this playing, know this. So we know the level of terror that was created by that event. Second thing we know is that Germany was building atomic weapons. And there was lots of stories about how the bombing campaigns disrupted their atomic weapon development and disruptions in Norway in transporting water, heavy water to Germany and so forth. And we know if Germany had developed these atomic weapons before the US did, maybe it would be Washington, D.C. and New York, not Hiroshima and Nagasaki that suffered from it. And the course of history would have been changed tremendously. We also know that's true. That also heightens our anxiety about this fear of nuclear annihilation. And we know the Russians are developing atomic weapons at the same time as they are building the Soviet Union, this combative situation east-west. That's also something we realize, that the atomic problem is actually still here. Right? So all of us are sitting around the table and we come to the conclusion that this is probably the paramount driver of national policy, because in fact this is real and big. Step one. Step two, big science really raised the specter of additional new discoveries, even more devastating than these nuclear weapons. Big science had now entered the scene. And it had changed the whole picture of war and how these nuclear weapons or biological weapons or other weapons might have devastating consequences. So this is something we had to consider, how to do that. So Vannevar Bush wrote this document called Science: The Endless Frontiers. Many of the older people at least have read that very well. And it laid out a plan for the country. And basically it said that the U.S. must remain at the forefront of every area of science and engineering to provide for national security, health, and welfare. The idea being that no one really knew what was going to be next following atomic weapons. But there were going to be things coming. And therefore, the U.S. needed to be prepared for that. And the only way to be prepared for that was to be at the forefront. If anything's going to be developed, the U.S. needed to be there. And therefore, that's a way that you don't get surprised by these events. That's because of this fear factor and the fear of the big science new deliverables. The U.S. had to be there. Now, the big problem was, of course, that the U.S. was not prepared in any way to be at the forefront of every area of science and engineering. U.S. research enterprise was not the equivalents of the Germans and the Europeans at that time, actually. And U.S. universities did not play a big role in research at that time, in general. There were certain cases, of course, but not as a whole, not at a national level. So this policy, this statement, this simple statement, essentially had a number of implications. For example, Vannevar Bush's report said that universities were going to be responsible for basic research. Well, there were no way they were prepared for this. So that meant the states were not prepared to fund it. That means it had to be funded by government. So that was essentially a call to government to essentially move universities into a capacity that they could be responsible for basic research at a national level. That's a very powerful statement, especially since that became national policy. And of course, we had to continue to be prominently concerned about both the big science developments that are going to come and nuclear annihilation. So, so just to cut to the chase here, the strategy basically for this 20th century end was basically isolation of adversaries and control of their access to information and innovations for protecting national security and economic advantages in a global context characterized by stable principal features. That is the description of what happened for this period. The principal ideas are control of access to information and innovations. This was a period of control of access to innovations, because only by controlling access to innovations and information could you control people's ability to create these weapons and these accesses. It's for protecting national security and economic advantages. You isolate your adversaries. You essentially isolate, meaning the adversaries don't get access to it and your allies get access to it. So it's an isolation. It's an isolation, I call it the isolation and control problem. Isolating adversaries, control advantages in a stable global context. This was stable for 45 years. For 45 years, this policy did not change in the country. It set the direction of the country, basically. And the direction was big. For example, the universities we have today wouldn't exist without this 45-year period. You cannot create universities in 10 years, or you can't even create them in 15 years. It required them to be a policy that lasted for 30 or 40 years in order to build the university system we have in this country today. If the Soviet Union had collapsed in 10 or 15 years, we would not have the universities we have today. No way, my view. In other words, that direction would have not existed, because only this fear of nuclear annihilation is what kept this going. And the idea of being at the forefront of all these areas required supporting engineering sciences, and every time somebody had an idea for a new science or new engineering, it got funded by the government, because you had to be at the forefront. You cannot be left behind. You cannot be tricked. You cannot be fooled by something that pops out of nowhere. So it was really a tremendous period for us, but it's the stability of this for 45 years, which was really great. So the Soviet Union fortunately lasted long enough that allowed the university and the U.S. to build up its university enterprises to where they got to. And also not only did they continue to rattle swords the whole time, which essentially ensured that the public would continue to support this enterprise. The only thing the public in the country has ever supported for a long period of time is security. So the security threat had to stay there the whole time, and it did. That set the direction for the 20th century for us, and we see what the outcome is. Now, the problem is, of course, the Cold War ended. And of course, people talked about peace dividends and so forth. You know, and what happened in this transition decade? Well, basically, the fear of nuclear annihilation and big science kind of faded quite quickly. Because, well, first of all, the big enemy, the Soviet Union, is now collapsed. Therefore, who's going to be dropping the bomb? And big science, nothing really developed out of big science in that 45-year period. So therefore, maybe that was overplayed. And therefore, there were a lot of disruptive global changes and reordering of nations. You know, for example, you had a lot of Eastern Bloc countries that essentially wanted to join the West in the knowledge economy and be engaged like the West. So they were reordering. You didn't have the former divide where you had the West on one side, East on the other, you know, good guys, bad guys. That kind of simple country divide where the countries essentially were controlling it didn't exist anymore. You now have, you have ordering based on issues rather than just East-West. The internet is now developed for communications. World Wide Web, 1990. We had open communications quite widely. 2+ billion people joined this knowledge economy. And the world became globally connected in the 1990s. All of a sudden, wide open, globally connected. Google was founded in 1998 with the express purpose of making all information in the world available to everybody for free. So you went from controlling information and innovations to making all information in the world available to everybody for free. I mean, this is like, you know, stop to stop in terms of where we are. So essentially, the innovation environment of the 20th century died like a hot rock. Everything that was holding it together collapsed abruptly. And so basically the capability to control and protect information and innovations for commercial and security and other advantages, this hallmark of the Cold War that held the whole thing together for nearly half a century, essentially collapsed along with stability in the global direction. The stability in the global direction was controlled by the countries, essentially, that were, you know, U.S., Soviet Union, that were holding this stable. That's why it lasted for so long. But that's gone. It dropped instantly. Edward Snowden was entirely predictable in this period. He was coming, no doubt about it, because everybody's connected together. You know, the internet's not controllable. I mean, no way. So all this cybersecurity stuff we have today, entirely predictable then, by the way, 1990s. So, but then of course, everybody's now feeling kind of unstable. All of a sudden, the controlling direction that set the course of the country, set the course of funding from government, set the course of what universities were going to do, how the states were going to participate, and all of that, where the jobs are going to be, all that died, just literally overnight. So there was a lot of speculation about what's next in this new direction. What will be the next global direction? What's going to hold us together? What's going to be the next U.S. direction? And now, if the President of the United States called us together and we had our same little committee and we would try to set what the next global direction was going to be. We didn't have this security issue. We didn't have nuclear devastation on our agenda at the moment. Maybe we should have, by the way, but we didn't. So people started to speculate about, okay, what should be the next global direction that will give the country a direction? So this is just a list of a few ideas that popped on the surface. And people came up with these quite widely. First of all, people thought governments would determine this direction, as the same way the governments had controlled the direction in the late 20th century. Soviet Union, US, basically. Control of pandemics seemed like a good candidate to be a global direction. Maybe we should do that. Environmental quality, of course, a lot of people are interested in that. Ensuring peace on the planet, admirable to say the least. Global supply of water and food for everybody on the planet. Healthcare for all. Mega cities for expanding populations. Protection of the oceans. Reduction in global poverty, and you can have quite a few more. These were all candidates that people were considering would set the new direction for the country, where the country is going to go, where it's going to focus its attention in the future. But in fact, they didn't work. None of it worked because people wouldn't support it. As I said earlier, by the way, people only support national security as a whole. Some people will support all of these things, but not enough people would support them that it could set a country direction. So they missed it entirely, even though there was a lot of speculation on this topic. So this is, now we're in the 2000 periods, in the 1990 to 2000 period. Everybody's searching for the new direction, and they're searching for the government to deliver it. And the government is just waffling around. The government's waffling, doesn't know what to do, okay? So it turned out that while the government waffled and didn't come to any conclusion, what finally happened was globalization just took over. Globalization became the defining construct of this century. And it happened in a logical sequence of events, mostly on a commercial basis. First of all, you had the people from Eastern Bloc countries who are going everywhere, wanting to join in, apparently wanting to engage. Same way in China is growing rapidly, wanting to engage. We can think typically industry would move abroad for lower cost labor in manufacturing or assembling first, then manufacturing, and then lower cost design work. And then, of course, all of a sudden realize that actually there's a lot of talent there. So the talent as well as the design work is abroad, also lower cost. There are markets abroad. You need to have facilities in different countries in order to have access to those markets. And then, of course, they'll also have universities that are going to develop, and many of you are from international universities. You come here, you go back, you become a prominent person in your university and continue this engagement. So this cycle, you can see it going, very easily predictable how this cycle is going to work. And ultimately, of course, you now have an engagement in a global sense where it's not simply a matter of low-cost labor. It's actually looking for talent. It's looking for markets. It's looking for capacities that you don't have at home. And every country is doing this. And it's in a globalized circumstance. The United States, I think, as a country, is the only country on the planet that I know of that doesn't recognize globalization. The United States believes globalization is for other countries, not for the United States. But in fact, it's a defining construct, I believe, of the 21st century market, innovation environment. So it took over. You know, it's not anybody's fault. It just happened. So now I think, what came out of this? Well, this basically set the 21st century direction as I see it. And basically the 21st century emergent direction is engaging in global partnerships to accelerate capabilities for security, economic, and other purposes in a context requiring adapting to continually changing global circumstances, features. This is, in my view, the current direction of the 21st century. There are a number of key words here. It's engaging in global partnerships to accelerate capabilities, not just to do things, to accelerate them for security, economic, and other purposes in a context requiring adapting to continually changing global features. First of all, the direction is not set by government. It failed. It couldn't do it. It emerged from global circumstances as did the previous ones. So basically, the direction is not government controlled. That's one of the reasons why we have continuously changing global features, because in fact, only governments could control global features. So since the governments are not in charge, you're going to have adaptation constantly. So without control of information, you have two choices: use it before or lose it later. And that's, if you can't control information, which collapsed in the 1990s, if you can't control information, think of the government regulations, ITAR regulations, sensitive but unclassified documents, passport regulations, and so forth, all the control efforts the government has put forward to control information in the Cold War, those things don't work because you couldn't control information. In fact, you got Edward Snowden, you got all kinds of stuff happening all the time. So therefore, you have a choice. Use it before you lose it. If you're in a use it before you lose it environment, Well, you need to accelerate capabilities. The reason you need to accelerate capabilities is so that you can use it before others essentially take it away from you. If you don't use it fast, you're going to read about it in the newspapers as someone else in some other country has actually taken up that idea very effectively. You know, Apple puts out an iPhone, Samsung very shortly puts out an iPhone, so on, so on. So this is the way it works, okay? And therefore, there's a lot of pressure to accelerating your use of information while you have it, because if you don't, you're going to lose it. So the partnerships really are targeted to accelerate capabilities. That's why you have partnerships. These partnerships, the reason you have those is to accelerate capabilities for essentially this purpose. And what do we mean by that? This means that there's someone else that has talent or facilities that are necessary for you to essentially accelerate your capabilities and essentially get to the market more quickly. And that's what the partnerships are about. So they're targeted to accelerate capabilities. These capabilities could be products, they could be information, they could be innovation, they could be research, whatever you think is valuable that you want to have, the capabilities. This idea, I believe, was more or less fully adopted by industry by about the year 2000. It's pretty much in place by 2000. And in this regard, the universities are kind of uneven in this regard in terms of whether they recognize this or not. Partial adoption. I think universities, by and large, some are seeing this, but most are looking at the global interplay and global experience for students as a broadening experience for them, not as actually part of a 21st century direction for the country. They don't see all this picture. So I think this is a problem for universities, myself. And the government is not there yet, or at least the US government is not. Some governments are, by the way. You can find governments that are, big governments that are heavily into that. So this is the direction that happened about the year 2000 going forward, and that's the one I believe exists today. And so it's partnerships to accelerate and basically adapting to constantly changing global environment. Nothing stays the same. In terms of constantly changing global environment, think about this now. You got Google starts off as a search engine, 1998. And what's happened, what have they done since then? Well, of course, they have Google Glass, they got Google television sets, got Google cars. It's constantly moving into new domains all the time. It's not sitting and waiting. It's adapting to changing global features all the time because it doesn't control search engines anymore. It knew that in the beginning. You got, let's say Amazon, for example. So Amazon, sold books. Now you buy everything. Amazon is basically, I think it's maybe the largest retailer in the country, or is it ahead of Walmart? It's close if it's not ahead of it. Completely went from a book merchant to essentially a retailer, country's largest retailer, or Tesla, for example, or as people move quickly into new domains. Because if you're not moving all the time, you're going to get run over. That's the continually adapting global features. Because you can't control your advantage, and people are going to catch up to you. They're going to come real fast, faster and faster in this accelerating world. So it puts a lot of pressure on everybody to keep moving, keep getting at the forefront of your ideas. It's not entirely comfortable, by the way, but hey, it's not my fault. It's the way it is. So this is the 21st century environment, engaging in partnerships to accelerate capabilities while continually adapting to changing global context. You see this with ISIS, you see this, all kinds of things are happening. Okay, that is the situation. Now, to see the significance of this difference between these two periods, the 20th century and 21st century, I just put these down here briefly. The pre-1990 model, stable context, controlled by governments, defensive strategy. We'll talk about why that's a defensive strategy if you haven't picked that up yet. Post-2000, adaptable context, not controlled by government, and offensive strategy. And we'll I've talked about that a little bit. Make sure you get that, though. But look at this. If your basketball team, you're a coach now, and if your basketball team has a defense which is strong enough to prevent its opponents from scoring, then you can win the game by playing defense. But if your basketball team cannot stop its opponent from scoring, not good enough to stop it from scoring, then it can only win the game by playing offense and outscoring the opponent. Right? Those are only two possibilities. I'm sure you agree. So the Cold War was basically to win by playing defense. It essentially kept adversaries from scoring by limiting their access to information and innovations, thereby controlling their capabilities. By limiting information and innovations to adversaries, you could control their development of capabilities. That's basically, you give up your ability to score more points, as it were, but you also prevent your adversaries from scoring. So that's a defensive strategy. That's playing defense. The 21st strategy is to win by playing offense, engaging in partnerships globally to accelerate development and use of capabilities to outscore adversaries and then move on as they catch up. Google goes on to Google cars and so on. You got to move on because they're coming. Everybody's coming all the time. High pressure, global environment. So it's very similar to the sports game. But you see, there's a 180-degree phase shift here, right? You went from basically playing defense to playing offense. Bang, bang. They're as different as you can get. So it's not just an increment of what we had before. It's fundamentally different. And that's why it's so tiring and so exhausting, because things are changing so fast, constantly. It's an offensive game. Now it comes to universities. Now, whether universities are like it or not, they're in this game. There's nobody on the planet that's outside of this game. So this is the hard part. So we're well into the 21st century now, and it's what we talked about a couple of times before. What the idea is, it's a global direction. It's national 21st century directions. Universities, it's a university direction too, unavoidably. You don't have any choice. You're in this world, and you have competitive environments. You're doing research. You're doing all kinds of things. So there's a real problem here. The problem is, first, for universities, they need to move away from stability to adaptability, because you don't have stability. It doesn't exist. And second problem, you need to move toward engaging in partnerships to accelerate capabilities, because you need to accelerate your work in order to get credit for it. Otherwise, people will get it ahead of you, and you'll be watching it on television as someone else is talking about what they've done. Okay, so let's talk a little about universities here. So the problem here is universities just love stability. Everything about universities rings of stability. It's been very successful, of course, for many years. Stability was a hallmark of universities. It's a continuing feature of university culture. Tenure is a primary example of that. Shared governance, that's where the governance of the faculty and the administration and even some students are involved in deciding how things are going to go. Nothing could create more stability than that, because no one's going to support anything that doesn't support them. So that's guaranteed stability. Of course, crisis also, by the way. And there are few sunset clauses at universities on anything. You never see this course is going to be approved for 1 year, and then, or this department is going to be approved for 3 years and then have to be re-examined for a continuation for another 3 years, or a school or college. There are no sunset clauses on everything. I mean, the whole thing is designed to live forever when it's first put together. Is there anything more stable than that? And of course, unit-based and sub-unit-based responsibilities. In other words, a mechanical engineering department has certain responsibilities within engineering, and then there'll be an aspect of mechanical engineering, for example, inside of the department that may have some basis of control over some domains. So this is very common for all departments, not just engineering, but all departments. They have unit and subunit-based responsibilities. Once again, adds stability, because people's jobs and people's research areas and students, and so, they're all connected with these sub-areas, so nothing changes. Highly stable. Constraint of departments and these silos, of course, everybody agrees, they're stable operations. Programs and courses, how many of those get changed very, very quickly? Space allocation and control, the final frontier, is a very, space is so valuable, right? No one ever gives up space. You hide it rather than give it up. Okay, so therefore, that's the problem. Universities just love stability. They're not as comfortable with this 21st century environment. So we can speculate about some outcomes here. Now these are speculations on my part, and you can disagree, and you may have some other suggestions. All of that, whatever you have to say here, would be interesting for me to hear. So, but let's just take as an example that if engaging in partnerships to accelerate this creation and use of information and innovation in a context of adapting to change, if that's the direction that's driving universities, as well as the rest of the country, what consequences should not surprise us? This doesn't say they're going to happen, but if they do happen, they shouldn't surprise us. First of all, the first one is the faculty members. Some faculty members will seek multiple appointments in universities, industry, or government. And even globally, where they'll find special facilities and like-minded colleagues that will help them accelerate their work. Because the faculty members are going to want to accelerate their work too. Because they don't want to be left behind. They don't want to give up their research work to somebody else, someplace else, by just not being fast enough. So they're going to want to accelerate their work. So therefore, they're going to want opportunities to go various places. We should expect that to happen. Secondly, acceleration of multidisciplinary research partnerships for faculty and students will be increasingly attractive across departments, colleges, universities, and even countries. So there's going to be more faculty and students who are going to want to engage in multidisciplinary research partnerships for all the reasons we've described. That should be a factor. That should happen. I would expect that to happen. I don't see how it's not going to happen. Faculty. Tenure appointments will probably become less important. It may even be passed over for salary supplements or possibly even a kind of a partial salary tenure appointments. Because tenure is basically a manifestation of stability. And as we said before, that's not going to be the driver. Stability is not the driver. Accelerating capabilities will be the driver. So the faculty will want to accelerate their capabilities, accelerate their work, so they can get more credit for it. And there are many options for this as possible. So this will be more important than tenure. For the university has to develop a mindset and processes to respond to disruptive, accelerating change. This is hard because universities don't like doing this. They don't have a history of doing this. It's challenging, but I don't see an alternative. You have to, the accelerating change is going to occur, you're going to have to respond to it. So you have to be thinking about that, and the university community has to be prepared for having to deal with this. So prominent universities will also list faculty on their rosters from all over the world who seek partnerships themselves to accelerate their work. They will not be tenured or tenured full-time in any way. But they're going to want to deal with the university, to deal with faculty members and facilities here to accelerate their work as well as yours. So you'll probably list them in some category on your faculty. And your faculty will be in those universities enlisted in their faculty. Much more flow and partnership-based operation, not siloed. I predict I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I expect to see that, in fact. Engaging in partnerships will be central to university vision. This has got to be a central piece to university vision and will characterize university operations. And this is another big change for universities who don't enter into partnerships very well or very often. But I don't see how it's going to be exempted from this and still maintain its position at the forefront of its domains. A university will focus leadership on particular niches to ensure sufficient concentration to assume global leadership. Global leadership is going to be a big issue because, in fact, this is going to be a global game. Everybody's going to be playing this game all over the planet. And you need to have a position of value on the global platform for your works. So I think the university will pick particular niches to ensure their position. and they'll be supported by faculty from other parts of the world and country, as well as their own, and students will be engaged from other parts of the world and country, as well as your own. It'll be a much more free-flowing operation, building up the capacities for executing the work very effectively. So faculty participation in global partnerships located everywhere will expand significantly. So faculty will have all kinds of contacts all over the place that have like-minded people in areas of their interest. In-demand talent is a long-term issue. Talent is really the coin of the global realm today. So everybody's going to want in-demand talent. Universities will want it, industry will want it, governments will want it. Everybody wants in-demand talent. And in-demand talent depends on the issues of the time and the changing global context. Universities are going to have to ensure priority attention is focused on nurturing in-demand talent as well as recruiting it. So that means that if the talent, there's a certain talent need in the national environment, universities have to think about supporting that talent need. And it has to be a priority thinking on that, because otherwise those people won't have anywhere to go. And I don't know who else is going to do it if universities don't do it. I don't see another player right now. That'd be a good, I'd like to have a good suggestion from you if you see another player who could actually do it other than universities. Universities have not taken on this responsibility, but I don't see an alternative to doing that. And basically now, because of accelerating change, the primary responsibility of universities needs to serve the needs of working professionals. This is another one of those, because working professionals in this accelerating period of accelerating change, they don't have a lot of options about where to get retooled. They don't have it. And who's going to do it? Is there anybody more capable than universities for doing that? But universities have not taken on that responsibility. That's a big problem for us. Basically, partnerships bringing unique capabilities will be in demand. So if you have unique capabilities, those partnerships are going to be in demand by others. And these partnerships are domestic, international, will be created to accelerate capabilities. And they are not usually permanent. These partnerships are for a limited term to get things done. So it's not like it's a long-term relationship that's going to go on forever. They're very timely. Education. Growth of online and blended instruction, which is adapting to students' needs and demands, will grow and reduce face-to-face instruction, and convenient access to material content is there. I think that is probably happening pretty much already today pretty well. That seems to be growing steadily. You can tell me if you think it's a good idea, but it seems to be growing. Students must be prepared to prosper in global careers by understanding cultural issues for global partnerships through first-hand experiences in different foreign cultures. I think this is really important, because we're now talking about a global context here, and we're talking about these engagements globally. Students, especially U.S. students who have not been living in other countries, need to get an understanding of what it means to do partnerships in other countries and other cultures, and how difficult that is, and what you have to think about. Your first job should not be your first experience at having that kind of experience. So I think that's very important. And students will seek to learn by doing globally. Students want to engage actively, and they want to do that globally. And they want to engage in what I call learning through various competitions like Solar Decathlon, service programs like Engineers Without Borders, prizes like the Sikorsky Helicopter Prize, challenges like the National Academy of Engineering Grand Challenges, by the way, which is a great program, internships, international experiences, and of course access to education will accelerate as a priority, as demonstrated by the attractiveness of MOOCs still. The drive to accelerate innovation is a characteristic of the 21st century, and I think that's undeniable today. If you just look at the changing evaluations, and innovation should be a feature, I think, of every university education of every student, from value creation through understanding cultures of innovation to innovation implementations. It's really a key. Universities are singularly poised to create cultures of innovation that reach out to the entire community. Universities are the only organization I know of that have all the elements of an innovative culture on them. So universities could actually build, could be a promoter of innovative cultures for the community. And they actually could have programs that would reach out to communities to create innovative cultures. And this increasing need for professional training of engineers to prepare them for positions in new fields will also become a responsibility of the university. It's very close to what I said earlier. Okay, now, there's this phrase that's attributed to Darwin, which I don't think he actually said, by the way, but nonetheless, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. I don't think Darwin said that, but anyways, it's a nice quotation nonetheless, and attributed to him. And universities need to recognize the direction of our time. That gets us back to our original discussion of which way are we heading. So that's what I believe it is today, engaging in global partnerships to accelerate the creation and use of information innovation while adapting to continually changing global features. And I think universities need to recognize that stability is dead and that Darwin's counsel that they too must adapt to change is important for them to take. So I'd like to, I think I have one summary of all these points. Basically, the quick summary, universities need to recognize the direction of the time. Engaging in partnerships that accelerate capabilities is the direction of our time. Partnerships are for limited periods and purposes and not permanent. Expect stability to be chipped away from our universities sooner rather than later. Think adaptability in policy and practice. And stability works against university achievement today, in my view. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions or address questions. Yes.
I have actually two major questions. But first, a comment. Your transitional period objectives of the United States are all comprehensively already included in the United Nations global goals, the 17 one. The poverty thing that was at the bottom is now #1 in the global goals. So having said that, my first question regarding power generation, the power engineers, electricity power engineers of USA feel that for climate change purposes, the only positive solution that can be immediately applied is nuclear power. However, because Uncle Sam would probably not like to control the sporadic development of nuclear power all over the world, what would be your suggestion to the government regarding that?
You mean, I'm not sure what the question is. The question is about nuclear power.
The question is that
nuclear power. Nuclear power.
Produced by fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And that the only way to reduce that and try to stop or slow down climate change is nuclear power.
Yeah.
All the major power engineer associations in this country says it's nuclear power.
Yeah.
All of them say that. But the government, Uncle Sam possibly do not want that to be propagated throughout the developing countries.
Right. Well, I have to admit at this point, I don't see how we can meet our power needs and the power needs that are projected for the planet without nuclear power. So I don't see how that's going to happen. So I like, most people don't like the idea of nuclear power, but on the other hand, I also don't like being cold in the winter either. So it's kind of this problem engineers always face. You know, you have benefits and you have costs, and it's a trade-off. And I think that'll be a policy issue that'll have to be identified. But I don't see a way we're going to meet the current energy needs without nuclear energy.
So we have two questions.
I think it's a fabulous presentation and very relevant. But if those that are in power to make those changes and those decisions at the university or at the government are old school, right, because they are kind of gone through that transition period, how do you foresee that implementation of adaptability and change? How do you plant that seed?
Well, there are a couple of ways this is going to work. And of course, it all has to do whether this is really correct, right? I mean, this is just my idea. I've thought about this, and I don't see problems with it at the moment. I'm very anxious for you to tell me how it's all screwed up in some way. But it's quite different, nonetheless, than what we have, and the way we're thinking. The U.S. is mostly thinking in the Cold War still. We have Cold War policies. We talk about them and us and all this kind of stuff, you know, which doesn't exist, hasn't existed for years. So one of the problems we have, the U.S. has as a country, is it doesn't recognize that we're in the 21st century yet. So, but whether it recognizes it or not, we're in it, and we're gonna start feeling the consequences of it. So we could wait till we feel the consequences of it until we have a huge problem, and then we can start to make changes. That's what Winston Churchill would say. He said the U.S. always has a way of doing things right after it's tried everything else first. And alternatively, we could actually have some experiments where we try to move first. Maybe some subsectors, maybe a university or two, maybe a state, would start to move in these directions and see how it works and see where they benefit from it. I don't think universities can operate outside of the context of the country or the world. I mean, you know, those days are gone. It's not the Cold War anymore. By the way, universities were well suited for the Cold War, just like Japan was very well suited for the Cold War. The reason Japan went in the tank, by the way, sorry about this, is because the century ended. It was very well, Japan's economy and culture was very well suited for the Cold War. Not at all well suited for the 21st century. Doesn't engage in partnerships, doesn't have foreign direct investments, doesn't welcome companies, doesn't like immigrants. I mean, so Japan is not suited for this circumstance. But I don't have the answer for you, except maybe if people start talking about it and people agree that we could get more people listening.
You mentioned Edward Snowden a couple of times.
Yeah.
Do you see him as a hero or a villain?
Well, he's obviously a villain, but I'm saying, well, okay. He certainly awakened people, and he didn't behave as a hero in a sense. But the fact that he or someone the equivalent of him exists should not be a surprise to anybody. Should not be a surprise to anybody. I think that was predictable back in the 90s, because the internet was basically uncontrollable, and smart people are going to figure out how to do this. And that's going to continue to happen. Every day we get another surprise about some very secure information that's now all over the place, and that's going to continue to happen. I don't see what's going to stop that.
Sorry, Alan, we have a gentleman here. Good question.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
As an undergraduate student listening to this, it sounds great, but there are obviously going to be a few years where students like me are kind of still caught in this liminal in between. Is there a role we play in all this, or do we just kind of accept this? Talk to us.
Well, all you young people, you know, everybody's young here compared to me. You have a role to play, because basically you're the country. And the question is whether you want to take it up or not, and whether you agree it's serious enough and it's important to you. And even if the country doesn't take it up, you can even use the ideas for yourself and what you're going to invest your time and effort into. And whether you're going to engage in partnerships or not, or whether you're going to see the opportunity to build a talent pool about your topic globally, or nationally, or some combinations that work well. And so you can accelerate what you're doing. I would definitely recommend doing that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I want to follow up with what Francisco asked you about where this is going.
Yeah.
You started the talk about Roosevelt, and I know he met with Einstein. He set up all these labs all over the country.
Yeah.
We haven't had a president that's really been like that since him. And so I was wondering,
what influence does the National Academy of Engineering have with the government? Do you
Oh my
the
gosh.
President or Secretary of Defense or any of these people?
Think how unlikely it is for the President of the United States to ask his science advisor to put together the strategy for the country for the next half century or so, and then implement it. Of course, Harry Truman implements it. Could you imagine John Holdren essentially going to Barack Obama and Barack says, "Put it together, John, for the next half century where we're going," and then have the country actually adopt it? We don't have a government that works right now. So we don't have the same process where you can implement anything. And I don't know how that's going to happen. I think that gives me some substantial anxiety because I don't see how the government can ever act on this because a lot of these things are not, since our government doesn't recognize globalization to begin with, how can you present a plan that's based on this global environment that we live in? When they say, well, we don't live in that global environment. That's for other people. That's not for the United States. I have trouble with this. But I don't have the answer to that, but I'm trying to to raise the right question that maybe we can at some point raise this issue with government. But it's not as easy as it was in 1945.
Great.
So thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, you implied from your vision for the future that professional engineers will need to adapt to the changing environment.
Yes,
So
definitely.
I was curious as to what propositions you might have for universities to help play a role in that adaptation. So I almost get from that you foresee that the end of the road with your master's might not be the end of the road for the future engineers who need to change fields.
Oh, it's definitely not the end of the road. I mean, you can count on that. That's almost never been true, by the way. You have to continue to move constantly. It's constantly adapting circumstance. It's not a stable environment.
So what role do you see universities playing in that adaptation?
That's the latter part I tried to bring up, which is quite different. And that is, who is going to take the responsibility, to answer your question, to retool, re-educate, retune, however you want to describe it, professional engineers that are quite capable? Who's going to take on the responsibility to do that? Because they're going to need it, by the way. And the faster we accelerate, the faster that's going to happen. So I look around and I try to think of all the possibilities. I only see universities who could do that well.
That's more my question.
How would they do it? How would they do it?
Yeah.
Oh, they'd have to have programs, and they'd have the programs would have to be there. They have to create programs that they would have to be affordable. There have to be mechanisms for how people can afford to get back and do it. The government has to be involved. States have to be involved. It's a big job. But if we don't have our country tuned up for the marketplace, I mean, we are cooked. So therefore we don't have a choice here. I don't see a choice. We can't have people becoming unemployed when they're 25 years old and then that's it. And things, that's one of the problems with this accelerating change is, things go up fast and they go down fast. So you have to be ready to, you have to be thinking, adapting all the time. Your mindset should not be like it used to be when I was a kid. You get your education, you get a job, you retire, and so forth. No, it's not like that. It's constantly moving, constantly changing. And think of it as fun. Think of it as fun. New stuff all the time. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah, that's the way it's going to be. I don't see how it's not going to happen, actually. But don't worry about it. Just do it, really. Enjoy it. It really is. It could be a great life. Oh, it'll be work, but you can't play golf all your life. Yes.
I just do think that I feel the same reasoning you were bringing up about the effort to acceleration,
Yeah.
rather than maybe an effort for a specific goal. But at the same time, I feel like this behavior looks like something that's going to be something very unstable in the future. You know, like what I mean. Like if we feedback the acceleration in the system, we're gonna diverge necessarily. So my question is, why do really university want to take over in this process? Like I have this, like for example, if you think about iPhones, why do we really want to buy iPhones, the new one? Not because we think we might have a new thing for the new iPhone, but because we somehow won't be to be surprised about what's coming up with the next one, right? So the process is kind of inverse. Is this acceleration process that is accelerating us? It's not us that we are controlling the process.
Well, okay. Well, first, the reason we have acceleration is that you can't control the information you've got. Okay, you don't own it. Everybody owns it. It belongs to everybody. It's been shown over and over again that everybody's got everything. So the idea is, if you have a good, the point is, if you have a good idea, and you have some advantage through this idea, you better use it fast, because everybody's going to get it anyway, and you'll just be reading about it. So that's where the acceleration comes from. And our whole environment is being driven by this reality. So the question is, if you don't care, if you want to have a slower, easier life, you don't want to push it too hard, well, then you won't take advantage of your advantage, and you may not have a good outcome. That's up to you. Everybody has to decide that. But I think most people will try to take advantage of their advantage. That's where you get the acceleration. As far as universities are concerned, universities also have competitive environments. You have research programs, you're recruiting students, you're providing opportunities for students. You want to be as good or better than the next guy, at least as good as the next guy. So universities live in this competitive environment too. Faculty members, certainly, their research, they work really hard on it. They're close to some possible breakthroughs. They want to get those before someone else, some other country gets them. Or some graduate student that saw their lab, visited their lab one time, takes that idea back to someplace else, and all of a sudden, bingo. So there's this pressure to accommodate this changing environment presses the acceleration part. I don't, even for universities. So I don't, unless the university maybe decide to become just undergraduate organization and a teaching organization, maybe less pressure there in that regard.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that this should be something we should try to stop. It's just something that if we look at like 10, 15 years, there have been so many achievements. I mean, maybe we don't really know exactly what effects and roadblocks those achievements has, right?
Right.
So the university environment might be the environment in which instead of like just pushing forward, we might like establish as the place where we deepen what we found.
Yeah, right. Well,
of course, it's completely outside this marketing.
It's a value proposition, right? The reason for the acceleration is that there's a certain value associated with what you're doing. If tuning up the quality of what you've gotten has high value, that's what you'll do. All right. The biggest problem with acceleration, by the way, is people will move their stuff to market too fast. The pressure is to move it too fast, is to get it on the market and then fix it after it's on the market. And that can create a lot of problems for the public and for others as well. So, so the value proposition you'll have to track all the time. If the value proposition is to have no mistakes and no errors in your products, then you'll hang longer because that's where the value is going to be. So all this is dynamic. It's flexible. It will work with time. But it's just my thoughts.
Two more questions,
okay.
And then we're going to have to close. Otherwise, I think we're going to be here a long time.
Okay.
Any thoughts on how intellectual property will be treated in an environment where people develop technology through partnerships and then constantly change their partners? And
I haven't given that any thought, but I think that will be pretty much the way it's done today, through partnerships. There'll be some mechanisms for it to happen. I'm sorry, I don't have anything to add on that. It's a very good question, intellectual property question, and maybe some attorneys in mind can give me some counsel on that. I think they might do that with different groups.
Yeah, I have two short questions.
Yeah.
One is, what you envision is going to happen, and it's happening, but so everything's changing faster, ever faster and faster. Innovation promotes it, and collaboration promotes it. So the society, looks to me as a positive feedback system. When it's going to stop or collapse?
Well, I think that one part where the collapse is going to happen is that the things we're talking about are changing faster than the public can come to know them. All right? And therefore, the public can get negative feelings about change without knowing what the change is, just because they're unsure about it, or someone tells them it's a bad idea and so on. Like GMOs, for example, drones. And you can think of a lot of these things that people can be against without actually knowing whether they're really problematic or not, or in what way they might be problematic. So I think that's going to happen. I can't say how that's not going to happen as well, because the rapid change is going to stimulate this.
Yeah, thanks. It's very well. And second question is, you mentioned if we now, as we recognize this, but the government at this country couldn't do it, possibly do it, right? Do you think a stronger government like China or Russia could do it?
Yeah, sure.
Ahead of us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a real advantage of having an autocratic government. Yeah. That's one of the benefits, because you can make big changes. I mean, think of Singapore, think of China,
Make the fast defensive clap.
Well, they can lose it too. They can make a wrong decision. But in fact, in terms of implementing change, they can do it much more efficiently than democracy is such a messy operation.
Which one will win?
Pardon?
Which one will win eventually?
Well, that's an open question.
So I think with the time in view of the time, we think we have to close our seminar, but I think we should thank our speaker.
Thank you.
And give him a small token of appreciation. Thank you.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. It's very nice of you.